Imagine standing outside a hotel room door, flowers in your hand, your heart full of love, ready to surprise the woman you have spent the last 11 years of your life with. You traveled 2,000 miles without telling anyone. You rearranged your entire schedule. You left behind meetings worth hundreds of millions of dollars just to see her smile. And then, just as your hand reaches for the door handle, you hear something. A sound that makes your blood run cold. A moan. Not just any moan. Her moan. The intimate, breathless sound she used to make only for you. Mixed with a man's voice whispering her name. A voice you recognize. A voice that belongs to someone you trusted with your company, your future, your legacy. Adrian Cade had survived market crashes that wiped out entire industries. He had navigated hostile takeovers that would have destroyed lesser men. He had weathered economic storms that brought nations to their knees. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared him for what he heard behind that door on a quiet Tuesday evening in Miami. In that single moment, the man worth $42 billion realized something that money could never protect him from. He had never been more powerless in his entire life. But here is what makes this story different from every other betrayal you have ever heard. That moment of discovery, that crushing realization outside that hotel room door, it was only the beginning. What Adrian would uncover in the weeks that followed would shake the foundations of corporate America. It would expose a web of deception so elaborate, so carefully constructed, that even the most seasoned investigators would struggle to believe it was real. And at the center of it all stood the woman he thought he knew better than anyone in the world. Before we get into the details of what happened next, let me introduce you to the three people at the heart of this story. First, there is Adrian Cade himself. A quiet, self-made billionaire who built his fortune not through inheritance or luck, but through decades of hard work, innovation, and an unwavering commitment to education. Unlike most people in his position, Adrian never sought the spotlight. He preferred libraries to boardrooms, and he measured success not in acquisitions, but in lives changed. Then there is Marissa, his wife of 11 years. Elegant, intelligent, and seemingly devoted. She had been by Adrian's side through his biggest triumphs and his most difficult moments. To the outside world, they were the perfect couple, the kind of partnership that made people believe in love again. But as you are about to discover, Marissa had secrets. Secrets she had been guarding for years. And finally, there is Brennan Holt. Charismatic, ambitious, and dangerously charming. Brennan was the CEO of one of Adrian's fastest-growing companies, a man who had risen through the ranks with a smile that could disarm anyone and a handshake that sealed deals worth millions. Adrian had trusted Brennan completely. He had given him opportunities that most people only dream about. And Brennan had repaid that trust in the most devastating way imaginable. So here is what we need to understand. Why was Marissa sharing a hotel suite with the very man Adrian trusted to lead his most important venture? What exactly were they planning during those 72 hours in Miami? And how did a simple surprise visit transform into a corporate takedown that would make headlines around the world? These are the questions we are going to answer. And I promise you, the truth is far more shocking than anything you might imagine. Before we go deeper into this story, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. Whether you are in New York, London, Lagos, or anywhere else in the world, drop your location below. And if you are new here, make sure to click that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming stories. We have so much more to share with you. To truly understand what happened in that Miami hotel, we need to go back to the beginning. We need to understand who Adrian Cade really was and how he became the man standing outside that door with flowers wilting in his trembling hands. Adrian's story does not start in the boardrooms of Manhattan or the tech campuses of Silicon Valley. It starts in a small house in Ohio, with a woman named Eleanor Cade, his grandmother. Adrian never knew his parents. His father left before he was born, and his mother passed away when he was just 3 years old. Eleanor was a retired schoolteacher with a modest pension and an extraordinary belief in the power of education. She raised Adrian on library books, kitchen table lessons, and the unwavering conviction that knowledge could lift anyone out of any circumstance. She used to tell him something he never forgot. She would say, "Adrian, money comes and goes, but wisdom stays forever. Learn everything you can, and no one can ever take that from you." Adrian took those words to heart. He was not naturally gifted, but he was relentless. While other kids played outside, Adrian was studying. While his classmates dreamed about sports cars and fame, Adrian dreamed about teaching. He wanted to be like his grandmother. He wanted to change lives the way she had changed his. After graduating from Ohio State, Adrian became a high school teacher. He taught mathematics and computer science in a school where most students came from struggling families. He saw himself in those kids. He saw their hunger, their potential, and their frustration with a system that seemed designed to hold them back. But Adrian noticed something troubling. The educational tools available to his students were outdated, inaccessible, and completely disconnected from the way young people actually learned. He started creating his own materials. Simple tutorials, interactive exercises, and eventually, basic software programs that made complex concepts easier to understand. His students loved them. Their grades improved dramatically. Word spread to other teachers, then to other schools, and eventually, Adrian found himself with something he never expected. A product that people were willing to pay for. At 31 years old, Adrian founded a company called EduBridge Technologies. The idea was simple but revolutionary. Create affordable, accessible educational technology that could reach students regardless of their economic background. Within 5 years, EduBridge was being used in schools across 38 states. Within 10 years, it had expanded internationally. Adrian sold the company for $800 million, a number that seemed almost fictional to a man who had once counted quarters to buy groceries. But unlike most people who experience sudden wealth, Adrian did not change. He did not buy yachts or private islands. He did not chase celebrity friendships or political influence. Instead, he took that money and built something even more ambitious. A philanthropic empire focused on global education. He funded schools in underserved communities. He created scholarship programs for first-generation college students. He invested in companies that aligned with his values, always prioritizing impact over profit. By the time Adrian turned 45, his net worth had grown to $42 billion. Not because he chased wealth, but because his investments kept succeeding. His quiet approach, his genuine care for the people he worked with, and his refusal to cut ethical corners had earned him a reputation that money alone could never buy. People trusted Adrian Cade. They trusted him with their companies, their futures, their dreams. And then Marissa came into his life. They met at a charity gala in New York, one of the rare social events Adrian actually attended. Marissa was 32 at the time, a financial strategist working for a boutique investment firm. She was beautiful, yes, but what drew Adrian to her was something else entirely. She seemed to understand him. She did not fawn over his wealth or try to impress him with connections. She asked about his grandmother, about his teaching days, about what he really cared about. For the first time in years, Adrian felt seen. Their courtship was slow and deliberate, exactly the way Adrian approached everything important in his life. He needed to be sure. He had seen too many wealthy men fall prey to relationships built on opportunism rather than genuine connection. But Marissa seemed different. She had her own career, her own ambitions, her own money. She did not need him, or so it appeared. After 2 years of dating, they married in a small ceremony in Vermont, with only their closest friends and family present. The early years of their marriage were genuinely happy. Adrian found a partner who challenged him intellectually, who supported his philanthropic work, and who seemed content with their quiet life away from the chaos of high society. They traveled together, not to flashy destinations, but to the communities where Adrian's foundations were making a difference. Marissa would help review financial projections for new initiatives, and Adrian came to rely on her sharp mind and strategic thinking. But something began to shift around their 7th year of marriage. It was subtle at first, so subtle that Adrian barely noticed. Marissa started spending more time away from home. Business trips that stretched from 3 days to 2 weeks. Conferences in cities she had never mentioned before. Phone calls she would take in another room, her voice dropping to a whisper whenever Adrian walked near. He told himself it was nothing. Her career was expanding. She was taking on bigger clients. That was a good thing. What Adrian did not know was that Marissa's business trips were not always about business. At least not the kind of business she claimed. One name started appearing more frequently in her calendar, in her conversations, in her carefully guarded phone. Brennan Holt. Let me tell you about Brennan. On the surface, he was everything a corporate board could want in a leader. Harvard MBA. 10 years of experience at top-tier consulting firms. A track record of turning around struggling companies. When Adrian's team recommended Brennan to lead a new education technology venture, it seemed like a perfect fit. Brennan charmed everyone in the interview. He spoke passionately about democratizing education, about using technology to bridge social divides, about making a real difference in the world. Adrian saw something of himself in Brennan's enthusiasm. But what Adrian could not see was what lurked beneath that polished exterior. Brennan was not driven by purpose. He was driven by hunger. Hunger for wealth, for power, for the kind of lifestyle that Adrian had rejected. Brennan looked at Adrian and saw not a mentor, but an obstacle. An outdated idealist sitting on a fortune he was too naive to truly exploit. And when Brennan met Marissa at a company retreat 3 years earlier, something clicked. Not romance, though that would come later. Strategy. They recognized something in each other that no one else could see. Ambition without boundaries. Desire without guilt. I want you to pause for a moment and think about this. Adrian had spent his entire life building something meaningful. He had never exploited anyone. He had never cut corners. He had believed in the goodness of the people around him because his grandmother had taught him that faith in others was the foundation of every lasting success. And now, the two people he trusted most in the world were quietly working together, waiting for the perfect moment to take everything he had built. It was March when everything changed. Adrian had been feeling the distance between himself and Marissa growing for months. They barely spoke beyond logistics. When was she coming home? When was he traveling next? The warmth that once defined their relationship had been replaced by a cold efficiency that troubled him deeply. He blamed himself. Maybe he had been too focused on work. Maybe he had taken her for granted. Maybe he needed to do something romantic, something unexpected, something to remind her why they had fallen in love in the first place. When Marissa mentioned she was going to Miami for a financial conference, Adrian saw an opportunity. He would surprise her. He would show up unannounced with flowers and reservations at her favorite restaurant. He would tell her that nothing mattered more to him than their marriage. It was the kind of gesture he would have made in their early years, before distance became their default. His assistant booked the flight. His driver took him to the airport. The entire journey, Adrian rehearsed what he would say to her. He arrived at the hotel just after 8 in the evening. The lobby was elegant but not extravagant, exactly the kind of place Marissa would choose. He approached the front desk with a smile, explained that he was surprising his wife, and asked for her room number. The concierge hesitated for a moment, then smiled and provided the information. 4th floor, room 412. Adrian took the elevator up, bouquet of white roses in hand, his heart beating with an anticipation he had not felt in years. The corridor was quiet. Soft lighting. Thick carpet that muffled his footsteps. As he approached room 412, he noticed the door was slightly ajar. Housekeeping must have just finished, he thought. But then he heard something. A sound that stopped him cold. Her voice, breathless and urgent, calling out a name. Not his name. Another man's name. Brennan. The sound was unmistakable. The rhythm of movement. The creak of furniture. The raw, unguarded sounds of intimacy that he had not heard from his wife in years. Adrian froze. His mind raced through possibilities, trying to find an innocent explanation. But there was none. There could be none. The sounds coming from that room left no room for doubt, no space for denial. He moved closer to the door, his hand trembling, the flowers dropping slowly to his side. Through the gap, he could see shadows moving against the wall, the silhouette of two bodies intertwined. And then he heard something even worse. Marissa's voice, breathless but clear. She said, "He has no idea. He actually thinks I love him." Adrian did not move. He could not move. His entire body had turned to stone. $42 billion, and he could not afford to buy back the last 30 seconds of his life. He could not unhear what he had heard. He could not unsee what he had seen. The roses slipped from his fingers and landed soundlessly on the carpet. Still, he did not move. Most men would have burst through that door. Most men would have screamed, confronted, demanded explanations. But Adrian was not most men. His grandmother had taught him something that served him well in business and would serve him even better in this moment. She used to say, "Adrian, anger is a fire that burns the person holding it first. Never make decisions when your soul is on fire. Wait until the flames die down, then act." So Adrian waited. He stood in that corridor for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, letting the initial wave of devastation wash over him. He listened to their conversation after, fragments reaching him like shrapnel. They talked about timelines, about accounts, about Adrian himself, referring to him with a casual contempt that made his stomach turn. Brennan called him a fool. Marissa called him worse. They discussed how much longer they needed to maintain the charade before everything would be in place. Eventually, Adrian picked up the roses. He walked back to the elevator. He returned to the lobby, gave the flowers to a confused receptionist, and stepped out into the Miami night. The humidity wrapped around him like a second skin. He found a bench near the hotel entrance and sat down, staring at nothing. For the first time in decades, Adrian Cade had no plan. He had no strategy. He had nothing but the crushing weight of a truth he had never wanted to know. But here is what separates Adrian from ordinary people. Where most would crumble, Adrian began to think. The conversation he had overheard was not just about an affair. They were discussing money, accounts, timelines. This was not just betrayal of the heart. This was something far more calculated. And if there was one thing Adrian had learned in 30 years of business, it was this. Never react to incomplete information. Gather everything first, then strike with precision. The next morning, Adrian returned to New York. He told no one what he had seen. He attended his scheduled meetings. He smiled at colleagues. He approved investments and signed documents as if nothing had happened. But beneath that calm exterior, a quiet investigation had begun. He contacted a private investigator named Samuel Cross, a man whose reputation for discretion was matched only by his skill at uncovering uncomfortable truths. Adrian gave Samuel one instruction. Find out everything. I want to know what they are planning, how long it has been going on, and who else is involved. Do not miss a single detail. Samuel nodded. He had worked for wealthy clients before. He had seen marriages collapse under the weight of secrets. But something in Adrian's eyes told him this case was different. This was not just a jealous husband looking for divorce evidence. This was a man preparing for war. What Samuel would discover over the following weeks would make the affair seem almost trivial. Because Marissa and Brennan were not just having a romantic relationship. They were executing a plan that had been years in the making. And the target was not just Adrian's heart. It was his entire empire. If you are still with us, I want you to take a moment and think about this. How would you feel if you discovered that the person you trusted most in the world had been lying to you for years? Not just about another relationship, but about everything. About their motivations. About their intentions. About who they really were. It is a question worth sitting with, because Adrian had to sit with it every single day from that moment forward. And if this story has your heart racing, if you are genuinely invested in what happens next, I want you to do something for me. Type the words "still watching" in the comments below. Let us see who is truly here for the entire journey. Because what comes next in this story is something you will not want to miss. The investigation revealed secrets that even Adrian could not have imagined. Samuel Cross was thorough. That was why Adrian had hired him. Over the next 6 weeks, Samuel built a picture so detailed, so damning, that even he was shocked by what he found. He started with Marissa's travel records. Every trip she had claimed was for business was cross-referenced against actual conference schedules, client meetings, and credit card statements. The discrepancies were staggering. For every 3 business trips Marissa claimed, only one could be verified as legitimate. The others were fiction. Where had she actually been? Samuel traced hotel bookings, airline reservations, and rental car records. A pattern emerged. The Bahamas, repeatedly. Miami, often. A private resort in Costa Rica, twice. And every single time, Brennan Holt's travel records showed him in the same locations on the same dates. They had been meeting secretly for over 2 years. Not just for romantic encounters, though those certainly happened, but for meetings that included other participants. Lawyers, accountants, representatives from offshore financial institutions. Samuel obtained copies of documents that should never have existed. Shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands, with Marissa listed as the beneficial owner. Trusts in the British Virgin Islands holding assets that had been quietly transferred from Adrian's own accounts. Falsified expense reports that had siphoned millions from companies Adrian controlled. Every trail led back to the same conclusion. Marissa was systematically draining Adrian's wealth and hiding it in structures designed to be untraceable. But the financial theft was only part of the picture. Samuel discovered something even more troubling. Marissa had been collecting information on Adrian's business associates for years. Emails that could be used as leverage. records of conversations that contained admissions of questionable practices, photographs that could destroy careers and marriages if released. She was building a blackmail portfolio, and Adrian's name was all over it. Why would she do this? Samuel found the answer in a series of encrypted messages between Marissa and Brennan. They were planning a hostile takeover, not of a company, but of Adrian's entire legacy. The plan was elegant in its cruelty. First, drain enough capital to weaken Adrian's position. Then, use the blackmail material to neutralize anyone who might defend him. Finally, when Adrian was isolated and vulnerable, leak fabricated evidence suggesting he had engaged in insider trading. The resulting investigation would destroy his reputation, force him to resign from his own foundations, and leave his empire ripe for acquisition. And here is the part that broke Adrian's heart all over again. The messages made one thing absolutely clear. This was not Brennan's plan. It was Marissa's. She had been the mastermind from the very beginning. Brennan was ambitious, yes, but he lacked the patience and the strategic vision to execute something this complex. Marissa had identified him as a useful tool years ago. She had seduced him not out of love, but out of calculation. She had studied his weaknesses, his ego, his desire for power, and she had used them to make him completely dependent on her. Brennan thought he was running the operation. In reality, he was just another pawn. Adrian spent 3 sleepless nights reviewing Samuel's findings. The documents spread across his study like evidence in a trial. Every page was a new wound. Every revelation added weight to a burden that threatened to crush him. He thought about their wedding day. He thought about the first time Marissa had said she loved him. He thought about every tender moment they had shared, and he wondered how many of those moments had been real. Was anything about their relationship genuine, or had he been a mark from the very beginning? The anger came in waves. Sometimes it felt like a cold fury, the kind that sharpens the mind and focuses intention. Other times it felt like a raging fire, threatening to consume everything in its path. Adrian understood, in those dark hours, why some men make terrible decisions when betrayed. The pain was not just emotional. It was physical. It lived in his chest, in his stomach, in the tension that would not leave his shoulders no matter how many hours he slept. But Adrian did not act on that anger. He could not afford to. Marissa was too smart, too prepared for a frontal assault. If he confronted her now, she would simply accelerate her plan. She would release the blackmail material. She would file the false evidence. She would burn everything to the ground before Adrian could protect himself. He needed a different approach. He needed allies. And that is when fate, or perhaps justice, intervened in the most unexpected way. Adrian received a message through a secure channel. No name attached, just a simple statement. I know what they are doing to you. We should talk. The sender included proof of their credibility. Documents that matched what Samuel had found. Details that only someone on the inside could know. Adrian agreed to a meeting. He took every precaution. Different cars, different routes, a location chosen at random. And when he arrived at a small cafe in Brooklyn, the person waiting for him was the last person he expected to see. Lydia Holt, Brennan's wife. Lydia was not what Adrian had anticipated. He had seen her at company events, always standing a step behind Brennan, always smiling the polite smile of a corporate spouse. He had assumed she was exactly what she appeared to be, a supportive wife, oblivious to her husband's true nature. He could not have been more wrong. Lydia was an investigative journalist. Before she married Brennan, she had worked for one of the most respected publications in the country, breaking stories about financial misconduct that had sent executives to prison. She had stopped working publicly when she married Brennan. Not because she wanted to, but because she had started investigating him. 3 years into their marriage, Lydia had discovered discrepancies in Brennan's financial statements. Payments that did not make sense. Meetings with people who had no legitimate business connection to his work. She had started digging quietly, carefully, knowing that any misstep could alert him to her suspicions. What Lydia found led her directly to Marissa. She had pieced together the affair, the shell companies, the blackmail operation. But she had struggled to understand the full picture because she did not have access to Adrian's side of the story. When she learned about Samuel Cross's investigation through a mutual contact, she knew she had to reach out. Sitting across from Adrian in that Brooklyn cafe, Lydia laid out everything she knew. Her evidence filled in gaps that Samuel's investigation had missed. She had recordings of Brennan discussing the insider trading frame-up. She had emails that proved Marissa's central role in the conspiracy. She had names of other victims, people Brennan had manipulated under Marissa's direction, whose silence had been purchased through fear and shame. Adrian listened. He said very little. But when Lydia finished, he asked her one question. What do you want from this? Lydia's answer was simple. I want the truth to come out. I want justice for the people they have hurt. And I want my marriage to end without becoming their latest victim. In that moment, something shifted. Two people who had been betrayed by the same conspiracy found themselves united by a common purpose. Adrian had resources. Lydia had evidence and journalistic skills. Together, they had something neither could achieve alone. The means to destroy Marissa and Brennan without becoming collateral damage in the process. Over the next month, Adrian and Lydia worked in absolute secrecy. They met in locations that changed every time. They communicated through encrypted channels that even Samuel did not know about. They built a case so comprehensive, so bulletproof, that there would be no way for Marissa or Brennan to wiggle out of it. Lydia's journalistic instincts proved invaluable. She knew how to structure information for maximum impact. She knew which regulatory bodies would act quickly and which would bury complaints in bureaucratic delays. She had contacts in newsrooms across the country who could be trusted to handle sensitive material responsibly. And perhaps most importantly, she understood the psychology of exposure. She knew that timing was everything. Adrian contributed his own expertise. He understood the financial architecture of his empire better than anyone. He could trace the flow of stolen funds through shell companies and offshore accounts. He knew which board members would support him and which had already been compromised by Marissa's blackmail. And he had the resources to ensure that every piece of evidence was verified, documented, and preserved in ways that would hold up in court. But building the case was only half the battle. They also had to protect themselves from retaliation. Marissa was smart enough to have contingency plans. If she sensed trouble, she would act first. The blackmail material she had gathered could destroy lives. The false evidence of insider trading could trigger investigations that took years to resolve. Adrian and Lydia needed to neutralize those threats before going public. This is where Adrian's quiet network of relationships paid off. Over his decades in business, he had helped countless people. Scholarship recipients who had become successful professionals. Entrepreneurs whose companies he had funded when no one else believed in them. Executives who owed their careers to opportunities he had provided. He reached out to a carefully selected few. He explained the situation without asking for anything specific. And one by one, they offered help. A former scholarship recipient who now worked at the FBI agreed to review the evidence and advise on how to present it to federal prosecutors. An entrepreneur who had built a cybersecurity company helped secure Adrian's digital communications against any surveillance Marissa might attempt. A journalist Adrian had mentored years ago agreed to be the first to publish the story, ensuring it would be told accurately and fairly. Meanwhile, Lydia worked on the blackmail angle. She contacted the victims directly, meeting with them in private and explaining what she knew. She showed them proof that Marissa was the source of their torment. And she offered them a choice: continue living in fear or step forward and testify when the time came. The responses varied. Some were too afraid to participate. Others, emboldened by the chance for justice, agreed immediately. In the end, 7 of the 12 victims Lydia identified agreed to cooperate. The final piece of the puzzle was the board of Adrian's primary foundation. Marissa had spent years cultivating relationships with certain board members, some through flattery, others through fear. Adrian needed to know exactly who was loyal and who was compromised. He arranged individual meetings with each board member, ostensibly to discuss upcoming initiatives. But the real purpose was assessment. He watched their reactions when he mentioned Brennan's name. He noted who seemed nervous and who seemed confident. He asked subtle questions about financial decisions and observed who deflected and who answered directly. By the end of this process, Adrian had a clear picture. 4 of the 12 board members had been compromised, 3 through blackmail, 1 through financial incentives. The remaining 8 were clean. That was enough. When the truth came out, Adrian would have the votes he needed to maintain control of his organization. Now, let me pause here and ask you something. Put yourself in Adrian's position. You have spent weeks gathering evidence of the most painful betrayal imaginable. You have discovered that your wife's love was a lie from the beginning. You have learned that someone you trusted is planning to destroy everything you have built. And now you have the power to expose them both, to watch their carefully constructed world collapse around them. What would you do with that power? Would you act immediately, driven by the need for vindication? Or would you wait for the perfect moment, ensuring that justice was served completely and irrevocably? Adrian waited, not because he lacked the courage to act, but because he understood something fundamental about justice. It is not about revenge. It is about consequence. And consequences are most powerful when they are undeniable. The takedown began on a Monday morning in September. Adrian chose the date deliberately. It was the anniversary of his grandmother's death, a reminder of the values she had instilled in him, the principles that Marissa had tried to exploit. He woke early that day, spent an hour in quiet reflection, and then set the plan in motion. The first move was financial. Adrian's attorneys filed emergency motions in 3 jurisdictions simultaneously, freezing the assets held in Marissa's shell companies. The grounds were fraud and theft. The evidence included bank records, wire transfers, and testimony from financial professionals who had unwittingly facilitated the transactions. By noon, every offshore account Marissa had established was inaccessible. The second move was regulatory. Packages of evidence were delivered to the Securities and Exchange Commission, the FBI, and the Federal Trade Commission. Each package was tailored to the specific agency's mandate. The SEC received documentation of securities fraud and market manipulation. The FBI received evidence of wire fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy. The FTC received information about consumer protection violations at companies Brennan controlled. Within hours, all 3 agencies had opened formal investigations. The third move was public. Lydia's journalist contact published a detailed exposé that morning. The article named Marissa and Brennan explicitly, documented their relationship and their scheme, and included quotes from several of the blackmail victims who had agreed to come forward. The story was carefully written to avoid legal liability while presenting the evidence clearly. By afternoon, it had been picked up by every major news outlet in the country. Brennan was arrested at 3 o'clock that afternoon. FBI agents found him at his office, still trying to understand what had happened. The look on his face, according to witnesses, was one of complete disbelief. He had been so confident in Marissa's plan, so certain that they had covered every angle, that the collapse caught him entirely off guard. He was charged with multiple counts of fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. Bail was set at $10 million, and he was taken directly to a federal detention facility. Marissa's situation was more complicated. As the primary architect of the scheme, she faced even more serious charges. But she was also smarter than Brennan, and she had prepared for the possibility of exposure. When federal agents arrived at the house she shared with Adrian, they found it empty. Marissa had left the country 2 days earlier, traveling to a nation without an extradition treaty with the United States. For most people, this would have been a devastating blow. After everything, the true mastermind had escaped. But Adrian had anticipated this possibility. His security team had been tracking Marissa's movements for weeks. They knew about her backup plan. They knew about the passport under a different name, the accounts in countries that would protect her, the contacts who would help her disappear. Adrian also knew something else. The life Marissa had chosen would be its own prison. She would never be able to return to the United States. She would never be able to access the vast majority of the wealth she had stolen, now frozen in accounts across multiple jurisdictions. She would spend the rest of her life looking over her shoulder, knowing that any change in political circumstances could result in her arrest and extradition. The freedom she had escaped to was an illusion, a gilded cage of her own making. Adrian filed for divorce the following week. Given the circumstances, the proceedings moved quickly. Marissa's attorneys attempted to negotiate, tried to claim portions of Adrian's fortune under the original prenuptial agreement. But the evidence of fraud nullified any claim she might have had. The divorce was finalized within 3 months, with Adrian retaining complete control of his assets and his legacy. The aftermath continued for years. Brennan was convicted on 17 counts and sentenced to 23 years in federal prison. He will be eligible for parole in 2041. Several of his associates faced charges as well, resulting in additional convictions. The companies he had controlled were dissolved, their assets distributed to victims and creditors. His name became synonymous with corporate betrayal, a cautionary tale taught in business schools around the world. Marissa remained abroad. Reports surfaced occasionally of her whereabouts. A resort town in Southeast Asia, a small village in South America, a European capital where she tried, unsuccessfully, to establish a new identity. But these were just fragments, glimpses of a life in permanent exile. The woman who had dreamed of controlling billions ended up controlling nothing. The woman who had planned to destroy Adrian's reputation found her own reputation destroyed instead. And Adrian? He emerged from the experience changed but unbroken. The betrayal had left scars, of course. He found it harder to trust, harder to open himself to new relationships. For the first year after the divorce, he withdrew from public life almost entirely, spending time at his grandmother's grave, reading the books she had loved, trying to reconnect with the values that had guided him before Marissa entered his life. But gradually, he returned to his purpose. He restructured his foundations to prevent the kind of manipulation Marissa had attempted. He implemented new oversight systems, new checks and balances, new protections for the causes he cared about. And he continued his work. Schools were built. Scholarships were awarded. Lives were changed. The legacy his grandmother had inspired remained intact. Lydia, for her part, rebuilt her career as a journalist. Her work on the case earned her recognition and respect in her field. She divorced Brennan, as planned, and found a peace she had not known during her years of secret investigation. She and Adrian remained friends, connected by the experience they had shared, though their paths rarely crossed after the initial months. There is a lesson in all of this, one that Adrian himself articulated in a rare interview years later. He said, "Betrayal is not the worst thing that can happen to a person. The worst thing is letting betrayal change who you are. I refuse to become bitter. I refuse to become suspicious of everyone. I refuse to let Marissa's lies define my understanding of love and trust. She wanted to take everything from me. In the end, she only took herself." Think about those words. Think about what they mean for your own life. We have all experienced betrayal of some kind. Perhaps not on the scale Adrian faced, but we all know what it feels like to have trust violated, to discover that someone we believed in was not who we thought they were. The question is not whether betrayal will touch our lives. The question is how we respond when it does. So now I want to ask you directly, what would you have done in Adrian's position? If you had been standing outside that hotel room door, hearing the unmistakable sounds of betrayal, would you have burst in and confronted them immediately? Would you have walked away and never looked back? Or would you have done what Adrian did, waited, investigated, and let justice take its course? There is no right answer, of course. Every person responds to betrayal differently, and every situation has its own complexities. But I think Adrian's approach offers something valuable. It shows us that strength is not always about immediate action. Sometimes, the strongest thing we can do is wait, gather ourselves, understand the full picture, and then act with precision instead of passion. I also want you to think about the people in your life. The ones you trust completely, the ones you would never suspect of deception. How well do you really know them? Not to make you paranoid, but to make you thoughtful. Trust is precious. It should be given carefully and maintained deliberately. And when someone violates that trust, you deserve to respond in a way that protects you, not in a way that makes you vulnerable to further harm. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think about your own relationships and your own responses to betrayal, I would love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below sharing what you took away from Adrian's experience. Tell us how you would have handled the situation differently or the same. These conversations matter because they help all of us learn from each other. And if you have been with us from the beginning, if you watched this entire story unfold, you are exactly the kind of viewer we create these videos for. Thank you for your time and your attention. We do not take it for granted. Every view, every comment, every share helps us continue telling stories that matter. Now, before we go, I want to tease something for you. If you think Adrian's story was unbelievable, if you thought the betrayal he faced was the worst we could show you, wait until you hear what happened to the man who found a stranger's handwriting in his late wife's diary. That story is coming soon, and trust me, it will stay with you long after the video ends. Until then, take care of yourselves. Trust wisely, love carefully, and remember that even in the darkest moments of betrayal, there is always a path forward. Sometimes that path leads to justice. Sometimes it leads to healing. And sometimes, if you are fortunate, it leads to both. Subscribe if you have not already. Hit the notification bell so you never miss our next story. And we will see you in the next one.